Hi, I'm Johnny Kay and welcome to Spotlight on GCSE English Language. This series of videos will help you to develop your understanding of the key questions in both GCSE English Language exam papers by looking at what the question is asking you to do, what you should include in your answer, common mistakes to avoid, and top tips. In this episode, we'll be covering Paper 2, Question 4. Paper 2, Question 4 assesses your reading skills. Here, you're being assessed on how you compare writers' ideas and perspectives and how these are shown across two texts. So, what does this look like? For this question, as a guide, you should spend 4 minutes planning and 16 minutes writing your response. A simple way to remember timings for your exam is to use the number of marks for how long you should spend answering the question. In this question, you'll be asked to look at the whole of both texts and compare how the writer shows their ideas and perspectives on a particular topic. Remember that the exam paper could also ask you to compare similar perspectives and feelings, even though the examples you'll have looked at are for different perspectives. As with lots of the other questions in the reading section, you'll need to make sure you use evidence to back up your ideas. Much like Paper 1 Question 4, you'll need to identify the methods the writers have used in the text. So, what else is this question asking you to do? Let's take a look. To answer this question successfully, there are 3 elements to complete. What are the main attitudes and ideas in both texts? What methods are used to show these attitudes and ideas? And analyse why the methods are used. Let's take a look at what needs to be included in your answer. Evidence is one of the key parts of the question that you'll be assessed on, as it helps to show you understand the text and that you can identify and discuss the methods the writer uses. Note that just because the question asks you to talk about the whole of both of the texts, it doesn't mean you need to quote or talk about every part of both texts. Remember, you're being asked to compare the key ideas and attitudes, not every part of each text. We've already briefly looked at the 3 main elements you need to talk about in your answer. The more effectively you can discuss each of these elements, the more marks you will be awarded. But what do we need to include to do this? Remember that you're not only identifying and talking about the main attitudes and ideas, but also talking about how they're similar or different, depending upon what the question is asking you to do. In this part of your answer, you'll probably only be referring to different parts of this text. Any quotes that you add will likely come when talking about the methods that the writer uses, and also why the writer uses them. When we talk about writers' methods, we mean the techniques the writer has used to communicate certain ideas, attitudes, or themes. This can be done using language features like similes, metaphors, or specific vocabulary. However, it can also mean looking at the writer's tone, the mood or emotion, or structural features such as the order of events or shifts in focus or pace. These are the features the writer uses to communicate their ideas, to share their opinion, or to let the reader know their point of view. It's important to think about the impact the writer's methods have on the reader. What do they make the reader feel or think? Why does the reader think or feel this way? It's also important to remember that you are the reader. How do the writer's methods make you think or feel? Why? Make sure you explain why these features have made you feel this way, as this shows the examiner that you've understood the text and found evidence in the writer's methods. A simple and effective method to explain why the writer's methods have made the reader think or feel a certain way is by putting yourself in the shoes of the character saying the quote, or in the same situation and thinking about what you would be thinking or feeling. What does the quote make you think will happen next, and why do you think this? Add detail by thinking about the effect the writer is trying to have on the reader. Why do they want the reader to think or feel a certain way? What are they trying to achieve? As I've already mentioned, you need to use quotes to evidence your ideas. Also, by referring to the actions, thoughts, ideas, perspectives, and attitudes in the text, you'll be able to show the examiner that you've understood the ideas and perspectives in both texts, and this will support your comparison as a result. But how can you write an answer that effectively covers both sources? What can you look for in the sources to help you? It's likely that the topic or main theme in source A and source B will be loosely similar. With this in mind, it's worth looking for similarities in the language and vocabulary used in both sources. Descriptions in the opening of both sources can also be a good start in finding similarities and differences. It's likely the opening will try to set the scene, to introduce us to the setting, characters, and set up any events. It can be difficult to structure your answer, so how can you do this? You could give a full answer for source A by giving a paragraph or detailed response about the feelings and perspectives in that source. Talk about the methods the writer has used. Use quotes to evidence your response and talk about how this affects the reader. Then, do the same for source B, giving detail about why or how it's the same or different as source A. Answering in this way will allow you to fully explain the methods used in each text. Do keep an eye on the time though. Making comparisons using this method can be challenging. Another way to answer this question is to bounce between the two texts. So, to start, open with how the writer of source A shows their feelings and perspectives. Then, immediately do this for source B, explaining the similarities or differences. Then, talk about the methods used by the writer in source A, and then the methods used by the writer in source B. Using this method, you're more likely to identify comparisons between the texts and show that you understand them. Now we have a good understanding of what you need to include in your answer, what does this look like in an exam? Let's look at an example. For this example, we'll look at part of an answer which achieved between 9 and 12 marks. You can see that the student has a clear understanding of the ideas in source A and is able to give evidence to show that they understand the ideas. After this, the student then begins to clearly compare the ideas and perspectives that they have identified in source A with those from source B. This is a good start, but remember, it's very important to talk about the writer's methods and how and why these methods have been used. We see this in the next part of the answer, and the student again gives a quote to support their answer. After this quote, the student then starts to explain the effect this quote and method has on the reader. This also shows us that they understand the text, the ideas and perspectives, and how the writer uses the simile. The student then finishes this part of their answer by again showing a clear understanding of the different ideas in the texts. Remember that your answer doesn't have to follow a set structure, and that you can add quotes, discuss writer's methods, and talk about the effect on the reader in any order. If you're struggling to get started with your answer to this question, you could think about opening with the perspective idea in source A and immediately saying how this is the same or different in source B. Saying what method is used in source A, adding a quote, and explaining what the effect of this method is. Repeating this for source B. Summarising by explaining how the effect of these quotes is the same or different. Now you know what to include in an answer and what this looks like, how can you make sure you give the best possible answer? Let's take a look. The more effective your comparison is, the more marks you will be awarded. This means that if you can clearly show you understand how the writer uses methods and compare this to the other texts, you are much more likely to be given 9 to 12 marks than 5 to 8 marks. A very simple way to achieve more marks is by making sure you quote effectively. When you discuss the writer's point of view or ideas, make sure that you give a quote to evidence this. Talk about what methods, language, structure, tone, imagery, etc. are being used in the quote and how this quote affects the reader, how it makes the reader think or feel. So, how do you make comparisons effectively? Ask yourself, is it the same or different in the other text? How are methods used in this text? How are they used in the other text? And what's the effect of both of these methods on the reader? So far, we've looked at how to give an effective answer. But what should you avoid? Let's look at the things you don't want to do. You won't get extra marks for saying the same answer over and over again, so it's important to read back through your work and make sure that you are not repeating yourself. Spending lots of time copying out lengthy quotes and then not explaining what they mean or which of the writer's methods is being used is likely to cost you marks. You won't get awarded for using overly long quotes, so only quote what you need. Remember to stick to the number of marks for writing time rule. Remember, it's the views of the writer you are finding and analysing and their use of methods. It is not the views of the characters. Writers will use their character to get ideas across, but this doesn't always mean the characters have the same views as the authors. Always think about the overall ideas and perspectives, not just one or two quotes or actions from a character. Explaining your answer is extremely important, but you should also talk about how the writer has made you come to this conclusion. What methods have they used? Where? And why? For Paper 2 Question 4, remember these top tips. Planning is key. What are the main ideas? List these as a basic plan and begin to highlight quotes that evidence these ideas to help you. Give yourself strict time deadlines for planning and writing your answer. Use relevant evidence. Discuss the writer's methods in the text and talk about how this affects the reader. There are no right or wrong answers as long as you evidence. Use sentence starters and connectives such as in source A, the writer, however, similarly, equally, likewise, whereas, on the other hand, in contrast. Check out the other videos in this series for Paper 1 Question 4, Paper 1 Question 5 and Paper 2 Question 5.